Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going back in time, back to Milwaukee in the late 70s and early 80s.
Oh, yeah.
We're diving deep into the life and crimes of David Van Dyke, a serial killer who really shook the city to its core.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got excerpts from his Wikipedia page, which is going to give us, I hope, a pretty good overview of his life, his crimes, and even what happened after he was arrested.
You know what's so compelling about this deep dive is that we're not just looking at a cold case.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to understand a human being,
Right.
albeit one who committed, terrible acts.
Yeah, and it's easy to just label someone like Van Dyke a monster and be done with it. But I think, I'm curious where it all began. What can we learn from his early life?
Well, according to the sources, Van Dyke was born in 1959.
Okay.
His childhood was far from stable.
Mm-hmm.
We see behavioral issues popping up really early, even incidents of animal cruelty.
Right.
Now, this isn't just disturbing detail. It's actually a significant red flag.
Oh, really?
Studies show that a disturbing number of violent offenders displayed this kind of behavior in their youth.
Interesting.
Almost like a desensitization to suffering that can sadly escalate over time.
It's like that saying, hurt people, but
Right.
is that always the case? I mean, not every kid who acts out ends up a serial killer, right?
Right. It's not a one-to-one correlation.
Yeah.
There's a complex interplay of factors: work, genetics, environment, individual experiences.
Uh-huh.
But in Van Dyke's case, the pattern is certainly there.
Okay.
He dropped out of school after 7th grade.
Wow.
Never held a steady job. He was constantly in and out of trouble with the law, supporting himself through petty theft and other illegal activities.
So a chaotic lifestyle, a disregard for rules, and a history of aggression.
Yeah.
It sounds like the foundation was already laid for something bad to happen.
Mhm.
But how did it escalate to murder, and what were his crimes like?
So between July of 79 and April of 80, Van Dyke murdered 6 people,
6 people.
all in their own homes.
Oh,
And what's chilling is the seeming randomness of his victims.
yeah.
They ranged in age from 28 to 79, representing diverse races and genders.
Jeez.
Imagine the fear that must have gripped the city, knowing that anyone could be next.
I can only imagine. And the way he carried out these murders, it wasn't just about killing. It was brutal,
Right.
almost personal.
Yeah.
Like the case of 78-year-old Florence Burkhardt stabbed 43 times with scissors.
Yeah.
The level of rage is just incomprehensible.
And it gets worse. One woman, only 28, survived his attack.
Oh my gosh.
He stomped on her, beat her with an ashtray, and then slashed her with broken glass.
Oh.
What's particularly disturbing is that, according to the source, after all of that, he caressed her wounds.
Oh my God.
It wasn't just about ending a life. It was about inflicting pain and terror.
Wow, that detail sends chills down my spine. Does that kind of behavior going beyond the act of killing itself point to a specific psychological profile?
It certainly suggests a level of sadism that goes beyond simple robbery or even a need to silence his victims. It aligns with his earlier cruelty towards animals, indicating a deeply ingrained pattern of aggression and an alarming lack of empathy.
So looking back at his early life, do you think any intervention could have changed his path, or was he just wired to be this way?
It's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah.
But what this deep dive highlights is the importance of recognizing and addressing these warning signs early on.
Mm.
What if someone had stepped in, offered counseling, or gotten him into a program? Could it have made a difference? It's a question we can never answer definitively,
Yeah.
but it's worth pondering.
It's a chilling thought.
Yep.
So at this point, Van Dyke has committed these horrific crimes, terrorized a city, and seemingly vanished into thin air.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Yeah.
How did he finally get caught?
Well, he didn't exactly make it hard for them.
Oh, really?
Like, it wasn't some dramatic showdown or a brilliant stroke of detective work. In fact, you could say it was almost a case of Van Dyke being his own worst enemy.
Uh-huh.
In May of 1980, he was arrested not for murder,
What?
but for attempted burglary.
Wait, really? So even with all these murders under his belt,
Yep.
he's still out there committing petty crimes.
Exactly. It seems that breaking and entering was just ingrained in his way of life.
Wow.
But this time, it proved to be a fatal mistake.
Mm-hmm.
During routine booking, police took his fingerprints.
No.
And that's when everything changed.
The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place.
He got it. Those prints matched evidence found at multiple murder scenes linking Van Dyke directly to the crimes.
Wow.
The manhunt was over, but the real drama was about to begin.
The trial, I bet that was a media frenzy.
Absolutely. The entire city was captivated.
Yeah.
The trial took place in 1981, And the sources mentioned that the most riveting testimony came from the woman who survived his attack.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the courage it must have taken to face him again, to relive that horrific night in front of the court.
It must have been absolutely chilling.
Yeah.
To hear her account firsthand, to see the impact of Van Dyke's actions on a living, breathing person.
Right.
That's gotta hit differently than just reading about it in a report.
It undoubtedly painted a powerful picture of the human cost of his crimes.
Yeah.
And what about Van Dyke? How did he react to all of this? Well, remember how we talked about the potential for narcissism?
Yeah, the tendency to want to be in the spotlight even when it's clearly not in your best interest.
Well, during the trial, Van Dyke, against his own lawyer's advice,
Oh no.
decided to testify in his own defense.
Wait, seriously, what was he thinking?
It's a decision that has baffled many.
Yeah.
He confessed to over 200 burglaries,
What?
but he vehemently denied any involvement in the murders.
Oh, wow.
He even tried to explain away the evidence, claiming, for instance, that he hit his surviving victim with an ashtray in self-defense.
But surely the jury saw right through that.
Of course.
Hmm?
His attempts to explain away the evidence just made him seem desperate and manipulative.
Yeah.
You have to wonder what was going on in his mind. Was it a misguided attempt at control? Or was he so delusional that he actually believed he could convince the jury of his innocence?
It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
This deep dive really shows how a criminal mind can work in ways we might not ever fully comprehend.
Right.
So after all the testimony, all the back and forth, what was the verdict?
After a relatively short deliberation, the jury found Van Dyke guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 6 life sentences, plus an additional 40 years, the longest sentence in Wisconsin history at that time.
Wow. That's a pretty clear message that the justice system was taking his crime seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For the people of Milwaukee, it must have felt like a huge weight lifted.
Right.
But for us, as we continue this deep dive, it raises even more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Van Dyke's behind bars justice has been served.
Yeah.
But we still haven't answered the biggest question. Why?
Yeah.
What drove him to commit these horrific acts?
Guess that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can we ever truly understand the darkness that drives someone to become a serial killer? The question that always seems to come up when we try to understand the minds of serial killers. We can, lay out the facts, understand the timeline of events, but the why is always kind of elusive,
Right.
shrouded in this, complexity of the human psyche.
Mm-hmm.
So as we examine the source material on Van Dyke, are there any insights, any clues that might help us understand the darkness that drove him to do these things?
Well, there are definitely patterns and factors that criminologists consider.
Okay.
Remember those red flags we discussed earlier? Those disturbing behaviors in his youth? The cruelty to animals, the lack of remorse?
Yeah.
These aren't just isolated incidents. They can be indicators of something much deeper.
You're talking about that desensitization to suffering.
Exactly. There's like a gradual erosion of empathy,
Yeah.
a disconnect from the consequences of one's actions.
Right.
And when you combine that with Van Dyke's chaotic lifestyle,
Mhm.
his disregard for rules, his constant need for immediate gratification,
Yeah.
it creates a dangerous cocktail.
So it's not just one thing. It's a combination of factors, kind of a perfect storm of sorts that can lead someone down this dark path.
Precisely. And when we look at the nature of his crimes, the brutality, the seeming randomness of his victims, it suggests a specific type of serial killer, one driven by what some experts call hedonistic motives.
Meaning he derived pleasure from the act of violence itself.
That's one interpretation.
Yeah.
It's chilling to consider.
Yeah.
But the details in the source material, like the way he caressed his surviving victims' wounds,
Right.
point to a level of sadism that goes beyond the need to simply eliminate a witness.
Yeah. It's a level of depravity that's just really hard to even process. But if
Yeah.
he was driven by this need for sadistic pleasure, why choose seemingly random victims?
Right.
Wouldn't there be a specific type of person he'd target?
Well, that's where it gets even more complex. The apparent randomness might actually be part of the thrill for this type of killer.
Really?
The lack of a pattern, the unpredictability, it heightens the sense of power and control that they crave.
Wow.
They become the puppet master, deciding who lives and who dies based on nothing more than their own twisted whims.
It's a terrifying thought. To think that anyone at any time could become the target of such senseless violence. It makes you question your own sense of safety,
Yeah.
your trust in the world around you.
And that's why cases like this, while disturbing,
Yeah.
are so important to examine.
Right.
And they force us to confront the darker aspects of human nature to acknowledge that evil exists even in the most seemingly ordinary places.
We want to believe that there's always a reason and explanation for such horrific acts.
Yeah.
But sometimes, as this deep dive suggests, the answer might simply be that some individuals are capable of a level of darkness that defies our understanding.
And that's perhaps the most unsettling takeaway of all.
Yeah.
There's no easy solution, no magic formula for preventing such tragedies.
Right.
But by understanding the factors that contribute to this kind of violence, by being aware of the warning signs, we can hopefully work towards creating a safer world.
That's a very good point. Well, this deep dive into the life and crimes of David Van Dyke has been a journey, I think, into the heart of darkness. A reminder of the human capacity for both good and evil. If this case has left you with questions or a desire to learn more, I encourage you to delve further into the world of criminal psychology and the ongoing efforts to understand and prevent these kinds of tragedies. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.